The shady history of the Constitution. Did the mandatory government school lie to you about the history, logic, morality, and legitimacy of the Constitution? For those who remain religiously attached to the holy document of the Constitution, or believe themselves bound by an oath they were tricked, fraudulent inducement, forced, or paid to take, then here are some facts that support our thesis that organized crime interests have been using government and control of the media to rob and control the population since the very creation of the Constitution. The creation and ratification of the Constitution are not what most government school children have been led to believe. It wasn't designed to protect life, liberty, and property and limit government as claimed, and its failure in those aspects, or even its inability to ensure the most basic of freedoms specified in the Bill of Rights, is evidence of its failure as protection from tyranny and its success as a means of enslaving, controlling, and robbing the population. The real story of the Constitution is a Wall Street of the time conspiracy, and that is the exact term that many of their contemporaries used to describe what had occurred to create a system that would allow moneyed interests, represented by political puppets, to tax everyone on the continent for their benefit and control commerce in the currency, which they started doing immediately after ratification. The conspirators were led by slave-owning James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. They hijacked a convention convened only to revise the existing Articles of Confederation between the states, and after almost half the delegates refused to participate, wouldn't sign, and/or left early, produced an unauthorized replacement, giving unprecedented control to a federal government that would be controlled by the exact participants in the years to come. In short order, they used this new government to begin taxing the population to pay off Wall Street speculators who had bought up Revolutionary War bonds from veterans and businesses that had accepted them during the war for pennies on the dollar. Hamilton, as first Secretary of the Treasury, paid these speculators 100% of the face value. He then went on to pay off the war debts of the individual states who had never paid them, especially Massachusetts, at the expense of those who had, Virginia. Thomas Jefferson openly questioned the validity of these debts and amounts. After Pennsylvania farmers began to rebel against a progressive tax on whiskey that hit the poor hardest and benefited large distillers like George Washington, Washington and Hamilton led an army of 13,000 into Pennsylvania to force compliance with the tax by rousting citizens out of bed into the snow, searching homes without warrants, and forcing citizens to sign oaths of loyalty to the federal government. The Bill of Rights was effectively tossed aside immediately after the Constitution was ratified and enacted, and the government had an army of order followers or gunmen on the payroll. Absent a 12,000-hour indoctrination program run by the government and the ongoing propaganda of bought and paid-for media, it is absurd to believe that a couple of dozen slave owners on a continent of 3 million people can write down on a fancy piece of paper that they run everything, then have their newspapers proclaim it as valid, but that seems to be exactly what happened. Anti-Federalist Samuel Bryan stated in his writing as Sentinel in Sentinel 12, January 23, 1788, quote, "That investigation into the nature and construction of the new Constitution, which the conspirators have so long and zealously struggled against, has, notwithstanding their partial success, so far taken place as to ascertain the enormity of their criminality. That system which was pompously displayed as the perfection of government proves upon examination to be the most odious system of tyranny that was ever projected, a many-headed hydra of despotism whose complicated and various evils would be infinitely more oppressive and afflictive than the scourge of any single tyrant. The objects of dominion would be tortured to gratify the calls of ambition and cravings of power, of rival despots contending for the scepter of superiority, the devoted people would experience a distraction of misery, end quote. The delegates assembled in Philadelphia in May 1787 for the purpose of amending, not replacing, the Articles of Confederation. And they were very different from the revolutionaries that signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The famous revolutionaries were not present. Jefferson and Adams were in Europe. Thomas Paine, Sam Adams, and Chris Gadsden were not chosen, and Patrick Henry refused to participate outright, claiming he smelt a rat. Out of the 74 delegates chosen, 19 refused or didn't attend. Out of the 55 delegates who showed up, 41 were politicians, 31 were lawyers, 11 were admitted Freemasons, with 2 additional that would join lodges after the convention, with over a dozen more suspected. According to Maryland delegate James McHenry, at least 21 of the 55 delegates favored some form of monarchy. The convention opened under great secrecy, held in the summer months with all the windows nailed shut, sentries posted at the door, and all the participants sworn to secrecy. The proceedings wouldn't be published for 32 years later. Madison's edited notes 53 years later. It's unlikely that the states would have sent delegates at all if they had known of the conspirators' plan to abolish the Articles and replace them with a federal government, and many delegates openly protested. William Patterson echoed many, quote, "We ought to keep within its limits or be charged by our constituents with usurpation. We have no power to go beyond the Confederation. If the Confederacy is wrong, then let us return to our states and obtain larger powers, not assume them ourselves," end quote. Of the 74 delegates appointed, 19 refused outright or didn't attend. 14 left early and some in open disgust. Of the 41 who stayed through September, 3 refused to sign, leaving 38 out of 74. That's 53%, hardly a plurality, and they signed not as delegates but in witness whereof. Of the 38 who gave themselves the power to make up rules for everyone and take the wealth of others, 80% would personally enrich themselves by holding some office under the Constitution, including 2 presidents, 1 vice president, 5 justices, 11 senators, and 8 representatives. Evident then as evident today. Like organized crime's control of the media today, the Wall Street crowd controlled information and perception during the ratification debates. According to Van Doren's The Great Rehearsal, page 183, anti-federalist speeches were never printed because the convention's transcriber, Thomas Lloyd, quote, appears to have been bought off by the Federalist and published only speeches by Federalists Wilson and McKean, end quote. Serious allegations were made in New York and elsewhere of Federalist mail tampering. The Pennsylvania Herald, the only paper reporting on the ratification debates, was bought off as described, quote, "The authors and abettors of the new Constitution shudder at the term conspirators being applied to them as it designates their true character. Attempts to prevent discussion by shackling the press ought ever to be a signal of alarm to free men and considered as an enunciation of meditated tyranny. When every means failed to shackle the press, the free and independent papers were attempted to be demolished by withdrawing all the subscriptions to them within the sphere of the influence of the conspirators. The Pennsylvania Herald has been silenced, the editors dismissed, and the debates of the convention thereby suppressed." That's from Sentinel 12/113, January 23rd, 1788. In summary, it is frankly absurd on its face that any written document or political ritual like voting can grant one group of men the ability to rule and control another group of men, delegate rights that they don't have personally to a government, or that succeeding generations can be bound by a contract that none of them or even their forebears signed. And if you want to learn a lot more about this, you can read about it in the book Hologram of Liberty, The Constitution's Shocking Alliance with Big Government by Kenneth W. Royce. And of course, this article comes from artofliberty.org, Etienne de la Bourse II. And if you want to send us an article, I'll turn to a video for you. This is a very powerful article going over the Constitution, which so many people still hold on to for their life when they don't realize that a lot of the most tyrannical countries in the world in the 20th century who committed mass atrocity, they all had the same sayings in their constitutions that they had, that everybody looked up to and thought, wow, we should worship a flag, we should say the Pledge of Allegiance, we have the right to vote, we have the right to speak. It doesn't matter. So long as you are under a government state, they will control you because you give them control over your own life. This belief system is called statism. It's the root cause to the whole problem, which nobody that supports the Constitution will tell you. But I'm telling you right now, I want you to answer these questions on the screen and really think about them. Pause the video if you must. If you want to learn a lot more about this information, a lot that you haven't been told, I encourage that you go to theliberator.us. That's theliberator.us. Now remember this, the difference between mafia and government. The mafia does not have a 15,000-hour system of indoctrination during your formative years to convince you its activities are something other than organized crime. Mafia, criminals, they're seen as evil, but people who do it under the name of authority or government, they're seen as perfectly moral, if not necessary and right for society. And if you question them, you're a criminal, you're an anarchist, you don't belong here, you need to leave. And all these excuses people say just so you cannot be free. And they can't be free either. They're enslaved in their own minds. So if you want to help humanity and really unwrap these chains that we create for ourselves in our own minds, then please get involved. Thank you very much for watching.